Back when I was just 14 years old, I built a little home studio setup and landed my first ever paying client. Fast forward 23 years later, now I've built multiple music companies that have generated anywhere from 6 figures per year to 6 figures in a single month. But that obviously didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took me 10 years of struggling before I could even cover my basic bills with music. And even after finding that initial success, I've also experienced losing it all and having to completely rebuild from scratch. The music production business can definitely be brutal, but my goal is to make it a little less brutal for you. Over these past 2 decades, I've collected insights that most people don't talk about on YouTube. These are lessons that can only be learned through a lot of real experience, and in my opinion, can make the difference between struggling forever or being sustainable. So I'm going to share with you the 16 lessons that I wish I knew sooner, categorized from beginner to intermediate to advanced. And my goal with this video is that just one of these lessons makes a major impact in your career as a producer. So picture this, you're a few years into producing, you're up making songs until 3 a.m. every night, fueled by nothing but big dreams and energy drinks, and you have that burning desire to try to make it as a producer. I call this having the fire. And that initial fire is a very powerful drug. Whenever I meet a producer who is earlier on, I have to admit that I still envy that initial fire. But producers expect to keep that forever. And the moment it fades, they collapse and they think that something is wrong. They think they've lost all motivation or that they aren't as passionate about music anymore. But that initial fire is kind of supposed to go away at some point. It's there to serve you at the start and get you through those early barriers that are going to be very difficult to get through. You need that extra adrenaline. But I've learned that long-term success as a producer isn't built on motivation. It's built on discipline and vision. Lesson number 1, don't quit if you lose that initial fire. It just means that you're ready for the next level. This is something that kind of makes me laugh. I will constantly hear producers, newer ones, speaking in absolutes. They'll say things like, no one has a budget, or the music scene in my city isn't good, or that's just not how the music industry works. Here's the problem. When you're starting out, your perception is limited by your experience. What often feels like truth is actually just a reflection of your current skill level and network, or you're just repeating stuff that you've heard from others. And until you've put in enough years to truly test your assumptions, you should approach your own beliefs with a little skepticism. The music business is much bigger and more nuanced than what any beginner can see from where they stand right now. Lesson 2 is, don't listen to yourself until you know what you're talking about. Younger producers get incredibly worried about what their peers think of them. But here's what you don't realize when you're starting out. By the time you're in your 30s, about 90% of the people whose judgment you're worried about right now won't even be in music anymore. They will have moved on to other things. When you have a vision for what you want to accomplish, it will probably take some out-of-the-box moves to get there. And people will judge you for that. Despite what they say on the surface, they'll tell you things like, yeah, you just got to be yourself and, go do something that's different. But what they're really saying is, be yourself and do something different, unless it makes me feel insecure about what I'm doing. As you get older, you will notice this more. Despite having previous success and being very proven at what I do, when I started a consulting firm 7 years ago developing producers, the criticism was almost immediate. People thought I was just an internet marketer, a scammer, greedy, all the stuff that you would expect, because at that time, it was weird to make videos on YouTube talking about business for producers. But if you look at what's on YouTube now, not so weird anymore, is it? I wasted so much time trying to argue my point and prove that I was not one of those things. From the start, I had this vision for building what I feel the future of producer management will look like. Am I going to be right about that? I have no idea. But if I had listened to those voices, I would have already abandoned the mission and I would have missed out on some pretty incredible opportunities. So lesson number 3, do your thing and just learn to let people be wrong about you. If you've ever had a day job, then you'll relate to this one. You know those days where you just wake up feeling like complete crap. Maybe you're hungover, you got a runny nose or stomach ache, whatever. But you still had to go clock in and work your hours at the grocery store that day, right? Or wherever you work. That's exactly how you're going to deal with imposter syndrome, because it doesn't go away with success. Even after producing platinum records, you will still feel it sometimes. The most successful producers aren't the ones who never feel imposter syndrome. They're the ones who feel it, then set it aside and keep moving forward. Lesson 4 is imposter syndrome is real, just show up anyway. So now let's move on from beginner lessons to more intermediate lessons for those of you who are a bit farther along. Before I do, a quick side note, if you like this video, then you can listen to the extended cut over on our podcast where I cover about a dozen more of my top lessons. The link is in the description below. Barely anyone listens to me on this one, but I'll say it anyway. Going full-time too early sets you up with a desperate mindset that can burden you for your entire career. How we start things is important. Once you develop that scarcity mindset, it's extremely hard to break. So just because you randomly get some work doesn't necessarily mean it's time to quit your day job. Producers often think that having more free time is the answer, but if you don't know how to use that time effectively, it's a waste. I'd rather you have the money from your day job because that financial stability typically speeds up your growth faster than extra time would in most cases. Because with that, you can pay for things to help you grow, like better equipment, marketing, or mentorship, or whatever, while developing your skills without the pressure of needing to make money immediately. You can start thinking about quitting your day job when you develop the creative and business skills you need, and you have so much work that the only thing preventing you from getting it all done is your day job. Lesson number 5 is the best time to go full time is when you actually know how to do it. This is my secret weapon for having a long-term career in music production, and I don't believe I've ever heard anyone else really talk about it. So psychologists have run studies and learned something pretty fascinating about human motivation. People are far more motivated by the fear of losing something they already have than by the possibility of gaining something new that they don't have. And they call this loss aversion. So if you can just hang in there for a few years, long enough to build the foundation of a career that you're afraid to lose, then your chances of staying in music long term are 100% higher. This is why so many producers quit too soon. They haven't built anything substantial enough that they're scared to lose. And without that psychological anchor, it's easy to completely walk away when things get tough. The producers who succeed long term aren't just talented, they've strategically trapped themselves by building a career that is valuable that they don't want to lose. Lesson number 6, if you want to succeed long term, trap yourself as early as possible. All of you watching this are coming up in a time where information is everywhere, and many producers think that getting a little bit from a lot of different places will be helpful. What I've noticed is that this creates a lot of unnecessary complexity because you're trying to combine a bunch of different strategies and business models all at once, and you don't really understand any of them. The biggest advantage I had when I was coming up was that I didn't know what everyone else was doing. I had one mentor, and I followed him completely until I outgrew his teachings. Then I found my next mentor and did the same. So pick one person to learn from and go all in on their approach. Ignore the FOMO. Your growth will be exponential compared to those constantly jumping between different pieces of advice. Lesson number 7, if you're going to learn from someone, actually learn from them. As you start talking to artists and labels and A&Rs, you're going to hear endless stories about producers who ghosted clients, bailed on projects halfway through, or were just completely unprofessional. Whenever someone tells me that the music business is a bad business, I often respond with, no, it's a normal business that happens to be full of people who are bad at business. And it's funny because social media creates this illusion that everyone has it figured out. You will often mistake luck for competence and assume that just because someone produced a track for a known artist, they must be very professional. But the bar for professionalism in music production is still shockingly low. Just by being reliable, communicative, and drama-free, you're already ahead of many producers with more experience than you. Lesson number 8, don't be too intimidated. The bar is still much lower than it looks. Statistically, most people are not financially literate, so no judgment here. I'm no different. It took me a decade to repair the damage I did to my credit score when I was in my early 20s. But here's the hard truth. If you don't understand the basics of money, you will never truly have a sustainable music production career. I see contradictions all the time. Producers are afraid to talk about money, but simultaneously, they get mad when they're underpaid or they get screwed over. Or they avoid looking at their bank account and they bury their heads in the sand and then complain that the music industry is dying and it's not sustainable. Listen, it is already really hard to make a living doing this. It takes a lot of work to finally start earning some money, so don't make it worse by mismanaging the money that you do earn. Lesson 9 is Learn how to manage your money. It will make your career much more enjoyable. Most producers grow slowly because they're afraid they will choose the wrong thing to focus on. And I get it, there's a fear that if you decide wrong, it will be a gigantic waste of time. But what tends to happen is that they either freeze and do nothing, or they sort of half commit to everything they try. What I've found is that you will learn more from just focusing on something, even if it doesn't end up being the winning idea. Because what you're really learning is how to actually focus and see it through. For example, I had focused on being a recording engineer for the first 10 years of my career. But when I moved to LA in 2012, I learned that I was a bit too late to the party to record grunge bands like I wanted to, and it made way more sense for me to pivot into production and songwriting, commercially viable music. But I didn't look at those first 10 years as a failure. It prepared me to focus on the next task at hand. And within a few months, I went full-time as a producer-songwriter, something I had never really done much of before moving to LA. Lesson number 10, don't be too afraid to focus on the wrong thing. Just learn how to focus. And speaking of focus, let's focus on some lessons for the more established producers. So I've been a business advisor and sometimes co-manager to over 700 music producers, many of them very successful, but so many of them never reach their full potential. They're insecure, they're battling inner demons from childhood, and they've accumulated a ton of bad habits. And they think that new milestones in their career will fix all that. They chase strategy after strategy, thinking that the problems in their life are just their business and career. And if they can just make that work out perfectly, then everything else will be okay. That is not true. When you are the business, your personal problems now become business problems. So whatever void you're trying to fill inside yourself, making music and your career has nothing to do with that. You're going to have to find solutions to that stuff somewhere else. I've watched producers land dream clients. I've watched them sign huge pub deals and win Grammys, and they're still a hot mess, all due respect. And I can tell that a lot of these producers have always used making music as sort of a drug to avoid dealing with their problems. And then making music turned into their career, and then decades go by, and they never stop to sort out their personal issues. And I'm speaking from experience here, not from up on a pedestal. But the most successful producers I know are the ones that have done the internal work too, because no amount of external success will fix what's broken on the inside. Lesson number 11, hitting your goals will not fix your personal issues. Working music producers love to get wrapped up in how things used to be, and that nostalgia can prevent them from adapting to the future. And then they're shocked when over time, their careers start to trend downward and they start getting cynical. So I'm sorry that the 60s are over. I'm sorry that the 90s are over. I'm sorry that the 2010s are over. The artists that you're going to work for in the future, they're growing up right now. So build a business that will serve them, not the industry that existed when you started. Quit assuming that what you have now is just going to magically last forever without you evolving. That's just childish thinking. I understand that our heroes didn't have to do some of this stuff, but that doesn't mean that these new approaches are wrong. It just means that they didn't exist back then. And also, how do you know that? I talk to established producers all the time who are very interested in things like YouTube, digital products, independent work, and just exploring what's available to them. I'm not telling them that they have to do all that stuff, but I appreciate that they stay curious. Lesson number 12 is build for the future, not for nostalgia. This sounds obvious, but most working producers still don't do it. If you're lacking work or opportunities right now and your pipeline is drying up, it's because of what you didn't do 3 to 6 months ago, and now you're paying for it. Here's what I want you to do starting today. Go meet a stranger, start one conversation that could lead to work, or go make a quick post or something updating your peers on what you've been working on. And then just keep doing that. Lesson number 13 is do something to grow your business every single day. Your future will thank you for it. So a producer's career is made up of 2 parts. It's a balancing act between work that pays the bills now and building assets for the future. The sexy stuff is getting a big placement and earning royalties forever, and you should still pursue that. If you want to, you can spend the majority of your time pursuing those opportunities. But the producers I've met who were the happiest also had a part of their career that generated income and they were in control of it. It will never be 100%, but just feeling like you have 50% of your career under control can make a huge impact on your mental health and sustainability. So decide what percentage of your time is going to be spent on risk opportunities versus control opportunities. You can shift this percentage as your career evolves, but this way you don't feel like you're just always playing the lottery. Lesson 14 is keep at least one income stream that you control. When I'm working with producers in places like Nashville, Los Angeles, or London, I notice a common disadvantage. While these music communities are very valuable, I've lived in a couple of them, many producers believe their local way of doing things is universal, and this can create blind spots. They tend to become closed off from other opportunities and perspectives. It's like someone who grew up in a small town of 500 people and has never left. They have a very different worldview than someone who has traveled the world. Lesson number 15 is don't forget to spend some time outside of your bubble. So about 2 years into my career as a producer, everything felt like it was falling apart. I had just landed a big project, I had hired a new business partner, but my old way of getting clients just completely stopped working. And my schedule was a mess, and I was working twice as hard with way less to show for it. And to be honest, I nearly quit because I thought I had failed. I thought that's what failing was. But what I didn't know back then was that this chaos wasn't actually failure. It was the opposite. It was growth. I think a lot of us assume that growing is supposed to be a good feeling. And the result of growth is a good feeling, but the actual growth feels like chaos. As you level up, your old ways of doing things break down. What worked for your first few clients won't work for 10. The schedule that was fine when you charged $500 per track falls apart when you charge $5,000. Growth doesn't feel like a smooth climb. Instead, it's more like you expand, then you break down, then you rebuild, then you repeat. You stretch beyond what you can handle. Everything feels messy for a while. Then you create new systems to get stable until you unlock the next level. So when you're in that messy middle part, don't just assume you're failing. It could actually just be your career telling you, hey, it's time for a change and you need to get better. You've just maxed out what you can do with your current knowledge and resources. So if you're a working music producer and you're struggling to unlock that next level in your career, then reach out to my company, Dark Label, and you can hire us on as a business partner or explore management, depending on what you already earn, and we can help you smooth out the transition. If you're curious to see what that looks like in action, then just check out this video right here.